Summer is supposed to be a time for sunshine, laughter, and carefree memories. But what if your vacation turns into a nightmare you can't escape? Imagine arriving at your dream getaway, only to feel eyes watching you from the shadows. Hear whispers no one else can hear, or see things that shouldn't exist. In this video, we explore 12 true summer vacation horror stories, each more terrifying and unbelievable than the last. From abandoned cabins to haunted lakes, from cursed rides to mysterious disappearances, these stories are real accounts from people who thought they were just having fun, until everything went wrong. Stay with us, if you dare, as we uncover the dark secrets hiding behind sunny days and warm nights. Don't forget to subscribe to Farcical Fears and hit the notification bell, so you never miss a story that will haunt your summer forever. Let's move to our first story. It all began as a perfectly ordinary summer vacation. Jenna and her family had rented a small cabin on the edge of Lake Hollow, a secluded place hidden among towering pine trees. The air smelled of warm pine and damp earth, and the lake shimmered in the afternoon sun like a sheet of liquid glass. Her parents were excited for the week ahead, promising swimming, hiking, and evenings by the fire. Jenna, 15 at the time, was less enthusiastic. She preferred reading and quiet walks to endless family chatter. But she couldn't resist the charm of the lake at first glance. There was an odd hush to the place, a silence that seemed almost too complete, as if the surrounding forest was holding its breath. The first day passed uneventfully. They unpacked, explored the nearby trail, and swam in the lake, laughing at the cool water on their sun-warmed skin. But that evening, as darkness fell and they gathered around the fireplace, Jenna noticed something strange. The reflection of the moon on the lake seemed off. It wasn't just the usual shimmer. It was almost alive, rippling even when the water was still. At first, she dismissed it as imagination or a trick of the flickering firelight, but the feeling of being watched clung to her. By the second day, the unease had intensified. Jenna's younger brother, Max, was obsessed with the lake. He would spend hours at its edge, skipping stones and talking to himself. One afternoon, Jenna wandered to the shoreline alone and noticed movement beneath the water. Faces pale and distorted seemed to stare at her, mouths forming silent screams. Her heart raced, and she blinked repeatedly, hoping the shapes would vanish. But they didn't. They lingered for a moment before disappearing, as if the water itself had swallowed them. She ran back to the cabin, insisting she must be imagining things. But the memory gnawed at her. That night, the family heard strange noises outside, soft tapping, like someone walking on the water, or perhaps fingernails scraping the wooden deck. Her father shrugged it off as animals or branches, but Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that it was something else entirely. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, counting every creak and whisper the wind carried, imagining shadowy figures moving across the lake under the moonlight. By the third day, the cabin felt oppressive. The air grew heavy and damp, thicker than usual, and the fog began to roll in from the lake, curling around the trees and the cabin like living tendrils. Jenna noticed Max was quieter now, staring into the fog with wide, unblinking eyes. He spoke, less and less, muttering about them watching from the water. Their parents thought it was excitement or imagination, but Jenna sensed an intelligence behind the fog, a lurking presence waiting. Late that afternoon, Jenna wandered along the trail by herself. The lake shimmered faintly through the mist, and the faces appeared again. This time, they weren't just reflections, they were shadows beneath the water, reaching toward the surface, moving independently of the gentle ripples. Jenna froze, paralyzed with fear. One of the faces looked directly at her, mouth opening as if to speak, but no sound emerged. A chill ran down her spine as the figure's hollow eyes bore into hers, and she realized with growing terror that the lake was aware of her, watching, waiting. Jenna ran back to the cabin, heart hammering, and found her parents arguing quietly about dinner. Her voice trembled as she tried to explain what she had seen, but they dismissed it as imagination, summer stress, or shadows on the water. Max didn't speak. He simply pointed to the window, and Jenna followed his gaze. Outside, the fog rolled over the lake, thick and almost solid, and something or someone was standing on the far shore. A figure too tall, too thin, completely still, staring directly at them. That night, Jenna had a nightmare that seemed more real than sleep itself. She dreamed of the lake swallowing her whole, water filling her lungs, while hundreds of faces, pressed against the glassy surface, their mouths forming silent screams. She awoke gasping, her bedroom window slightly ajar. The fog had crept close, curling against the cabin-like fingers, and faint ripples moved across the lake, in perfect sync with her panicked heartbeat. The next morning the figure was gone, or perhaps it had never been there. Jenna tried to convince herself that it was just a trick of the fog, an overactive imagination amplified by fear. Yet the feeling of being observed persisted, gnawing at the edges of her mind. Max refused to leave the cabin that day, staying close to their parents and the fireplace, whispering to himself about faces and whispers from the water. On the fourth day, the disappearance occurred. Max had been playing near the lake, skipping stones, when Jenna turned around to find him gone. Panic surged through her. She screamed for him, ran to the shoreline, and found only his footprints, ending abruptly at the water's edge. There were no splashes, no disturbances, just a perfect trail vanishing into the lake. Her parents rushed over, disbelief and terror mixing on their faces. But even their rational minds couldn't explain what had happened. The lake remained calm, ripples spreading slowly, as if nothing had touched its surface. Search parties arrived, and local authorities scoured the surrounding forest and water, but Max was never found. It was as though the lake itself had swallowed him, leaving no trace. Jenna refused to leave for weeks, drawn to the water despite the danger, haunted by the knowledge that the faces beneath the surface were real. Sometimes, when the fog rolled in thick enough, she swore she could see his face among them, staring back with wide, terrified eyes. Years later, Jenna still remembers the feeling of those hollow eyes beneath the water, watching, patient, eternal. She cannot look at lakes the same way again. The calm surface hides something else, something that waits, and the whispers in the fog sometimes return in dreams. She learned the hard way that summer vacations are not always safe, that some waters hide memories and presences that are impossible to explain, and that sometimes curiosity can lead to a permanent loss. Jenna tells her story now to warn others. Some lakes are better left untouched, some cabins better left unvisited, and some summer vacations better left forgotten. Because beneath the sunlit surface, the water remembers everything, and it waits patiently for the next visitor to stare too long, to look too closely, and to become part of its silent, endless collection. The faces, the fog, the lake, they are patient, aware, and hungry for the next unsuspecting soul. Jenna survived, but the terror of Lake Hollow followed her everywhere, an invisible weight pressing on every summer memory. And even now, when she hears the faintest ripple of water, she feels those hollow eyes, watching. Let's move to our second story. It was supposed to be the ultimate summer road trip. For college friends, Lena, Simon, and Carla had set off in Mark's beat-up van, eager to explore small towns, forests, and roadside attractions across the state. The sun was high, the roads winding, and the air buzzed with excitement and the faint hum of the van's engine. They laughed over music, argued over which route to take, and shared snacks as the landscape passed by. The plan was simple: travel, light, camp, wherever it felt right, and collect stories along the way. Their first 2 nights were uneventful, camping in forested clearings and by riverbanks. The only oddity had been small things that each dismissed as coincidence: faint figure glimpsed between the trees, distant laughter when no one else was around, and the occasional object that seemed slightly out of place the next morning. They joked about forest spirits and road trip paranoia, but nobody really believed it. On the 3rd night, things began to change. They parked in a small clearing beside an abandoned gas station, chosen for convenience and curiosity. The station itself was derelict, boarded up windows and faded paint, but it had a peculiar pull. Simon noticed that the temperature dropped suddenly as they approached, and the air grew thick and still. Carla, ever the skeptic, laughed it off, but even she felt a prickle along the back of her neck. After dinner, they sat around the small campfire, sharing stories, the glow illuminating their faces against the encroaching darkness. Lena noticed something odd, in the tree line a faint light flickering intermittently. She pointed, and the others squinted, seeing only shadows at first, then a vague shape that seemed humanoid. It moved with deliberate, almost stalking motion, though it was far enough that it could have been a trick of the flickering fire and the moonlight. Simon, curious and slightly intoxicated, wandered closer. Joking about checking out the locals, Mark and Carla called after him, but he didn't respond immediately. That's when they heard it, a soft, deliberate whisper carried by the wind, sounding almost like their names. Simon. It was faint but unmistakable, chilling them instantly. The hairs on their arms stood on end. Simon returned, pale and silent, but when asked what he saw, he simply shook his head, eyes wide, unable to articulate anything coherent. That night, sleep did not come easily. The forest seemed alive with sounds that were out of place, branches snapping, though no wind moved them. Footsteps circling the camp, distant low hums that resembled voices. At 2 a.m., the van's lights flickered on their own, briefly illuminating the clearing. They could see shadows moving quickly among the trees, just at the edge of visibility, retreating whenever anyone tried to focus on them. The following morning, Simon woke screaming. He claimed that he had seen dozens of figures surrounding the van in the night, their faces featureless yet unnervingly human, moving in a synchronized, silent pattern. Lena and Carla dismissed it as a dream, but Mark noticed deep, muddy footprints, leading toward the van, too large and too uniform to be natural. The friends decided to leave immediately, packing in tense silence. As they drove, an unsettling pattern emerged. Every time they stopped for food, gas, or a restroom, something felt off. Shadows lingered longer than they should have, reflection, and mirrors seemed distorted, and the radio occasionally played faint whispers when no station signal was present. Carla captured some of this on her phone, thinking it was a trick of static, but later, when reviewing the footage, the whispers were coherent, uttering lines they didn't remember speaking themselves. "We are watching. You shouldn't have come. Leave now." By the 5th day, paranoia had taken hold. The van seemed to deviate on its own, roads they didn't remember taking, landscapes that looked similar but subtly wrong. Lena swore she saw a figure walking beside the van at a stoplight, disappearing when they blinked. Simon refused to look outside at all, focusing on the dashboard as though the act of seeing would draw attention. At night, the campfires were interrupted by strange tapping and scratching sounds, and the shadows in the trees seemed to shift even when no wind blew. On the 6th night, they stopped near an old bridge spanning a river. Carla insisted it looked safe enough, but Mark and Lena felt an oppressive weight in the air, a sensation of eyes drilling into them from all directions. They tried to ignore it, setting up camp and attempting to sleep. Around midnight, the whispers returned, louder and more urgent. This time, they weren't subtle. Names were called, sentences spoken. "Do not leave. You belong here. Join us." Panic surged through the group. Suddenly, the fire flickered violently. The shadows moved unnaturally, stretching and contorting. Something stepped from the tree line, a tall, thin humanoid figure, completely black, its form wavering as though made of smoke or mist. It did not walk, but seemed to glide. Its presence caused a freezing sensation in the air, and all sounds seemed to vanish except for the whispers. The friends scrambled to the van, doors slamming, engine roaring to life. But the road ahead was no longer visible. Fog had rolled in thicker than ever, curling around the tires and headlights, as if the world outside had vanished. For hours, they drove blindly, the van moving in loops, the forest repeating around them. Occasionally, the headlights illuminated figures on the roadside, dozens of them, watching silently. They never moved toward the van but mirrored their actions, turning, halting, gliding along in tandem. Sleep-deprived and terrified, the friends began to argue, accusing each other of imagining things. But deep down, they all knew the truth. They were being hunted by something that existed just beyond perception. Something that knew their fears intimately. Eventually, the fog thinned enough for them to see a small town up ahead. Relief was short-lived. When they arrived, the town was abandoned, streets cracked and empty. houses boarded up. Even the sunlight felt wrong, casting long, distorted shadows. Signs of recent life were present: footprints, half-eaten food, a single moving bicycle butt. No one answered their calls. The radio crackled with the same whispering voices. Repeating their names, Mark suggested they leave immediately, retracing their route. But the van refused to start. Simon tried multiple times. The engine only groaned, then fell silent. By afternoon, the friends began to realize that their situation was not just strange, was impossible. Roads looped endlessly, landmarks repeated, and no matter which direction they drove, the town and surrounding forests were always in front of them. Days passed, or maybe hours, they couldn't tell. Time had lost meaning. They began noticing changes in themselves, thoughts intruding that were not theirs, sudden urges to follow the figures in the fog, voices echoing inside their heads, urging obedience. They tried to maintain reason, but slowly, each person started behaving strangely, pausing mid-step to stare into the fog, murmuring words they could not understand. On the 8th night, the final confrontation occurred. They stopped near the river again, the van now an extension of the forest, no longer a vehicle, but part of the oppressive landscape. Figures emerged from the fog in overwhelming numbers, hundreds now, surrounding them silently. Panic overwhelmed logic. Simon screamed and ran into the mist, swallowed instantly. Lena and Carla tried to follow, but were pulled back by unseen forces. Mark fought desperately, but the whispers inside his head became unbearable. When the van finally moved again, it was alone on a straight road, leading nowhere. Towns appeared and disappeared on the horizon, and the forests seemed endless. The friends were gone, or maybe absorbed into the fog itself. Weeks later, authorities found the van abandoned near a highway, tires flat, belongings scattered, but no trace of the 4 friends. The GPS showed looping paths, impossible routes, and strange coordinates leading into uncharted wilderness. The locals, when asked, spoke of the fog road, a stretch of forest and abandoned towns that swallows travelers during the summer months. Those who return, if any, speak of whispers, endless loops, and shadows that watch. Some claim to hear faint voices over the radio, calling their names, long after they leave the forest. Mark, Lena, Simon, and Carla never return, but travelers who drive that road today sometimes report hearing a van's engine, music playing faintly, and the unmistakable sound of laughter and whispers carried by the wind. It is said, the fog road is patient. It waits for those who venture too close, draws them in, and shows them things they cannot comprehend. Time bends, reality distorts, and fear becomes tangible. Summer travelers, curious and brave, may never see daylight again if they underestimate it. The story of Mark and his friends serves as a warning. Some roads are not meant to be traveled, some forests not meant to be entered, and some summers carry more than just the warmth of the sun. They carry shadows that follow, observe, and never forget. Even now, during hot summer nights, when the wind moves through the trees and fog creeps low across the road, the whispers of the lost travelers can be heard. If you listen closely, you might even hear them calling your name, beckoning you to join them. In the endless summer night. Let's move to our third story. It began as a summer road trip meant to be nothing more than adventure, laughter, and the freedom of wide-open roads. Rachel, Emma, and Daniel, 3 college friends, eager to escape the monotony of campus life, set off in Daniel's old sedan, packed with snacks, music, and a vague plan to explore small towns and hidden spots along the way. The air was warm and smelled faintly of asphalt, flowers, and pine trees as the city disappeared behind them. For the first few days, everything felt ordinary: charming diners, sleepy parks, and antique shops with dusty relics. But the sense of carefree freedom slowly shifted into unease, subtle at first, like a shadow brushing against the corner of their vision. Their third day brought them to a small, forgotten town near the mountains. On its outskirts, they stumbled across an abandoned carnival. The Ferris wheel loomed over them, rusted and still, its metal creaking faintly in the wind, though there was none. Paint peeled from every surface, the rides sagged, and the ticket booths were boarded shut. Rachel felt a chill run down her spine despite the summer heat, a sensation that someone or something was observing them. Emma thought she saw movement among the rides, a flicker of a shadow that vanished when she blinked. Daniel dismissed it as a trick of sunlight and decay, though his unease mirrored theirs. The carnival, though silent, seemed alive. The air smelled, faintly, of popcorn and burnt sugar, as if the place had been freshly used. Curiosity won out over caution. They wandered past the entrance, exploring cautiously. The swings creaked gently, despite no wind, and distant laughter echoed faintly, so soft it could have been imagination. Rachel shivered, noticing that each time they passed a reflective surface, shadows seemed to linger unnaturally. Emma, usually the practical one, whispered about shapes moving in her peripheral vision. Daniel tried to remain rational, taking photos of the dilapidated rides. When reviewing the photos later, they all froze. Faces appeared where none should have been, pale, expressionless, staring directly at them. The unease carried over to their motel stay that night. Their room was small and dusty, barely furnished, but it was enough. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by distant laughter, clinking metal, and whispers too faint to understand. Rachel awoke to the curtain fluttering despite the still night air, and noticed shadows moving outside. She told herself it was her imagination, yet a weight pressed on her chest, an undeniable feeling that the carnival had followed them. By the next day, they returned to the carnival, drawn by a mix of fear and fascination. Even in the daylight, it was unsettling. Swing chains moved, though no wind stirred them. Footprints appeared where no one had walked, and faint faces seemed etched into peeling paint on ride panels, featureless yet disturbingly human. Daniel continued taking photographs, but the images revealed more than reality showed: faces, multiplied in impossible ways, staring, silently judging. Each friend felt the oppressive sense that the carnival was aware of them, studying them. That evening they chose to camp near the edge of the woods, adjacent to the carnival. The sun set slowly, shadows stretching long across the overgrown paths. As night fell, fog crept in, curling like living tendrils around tents and trees. Whispers began faintly, then grew clearer, calling each of them by name. Stay, stay. With us. Join us. Rachel awoke to find the Ferris wheel glowing faintly through the mist. Empty carriages swayed, and shadows moved unnaturally between them. Their panic surged as they felt an invisible force compelling them forward, toward the rides. The Ferris wheel now seemed impossibly tall, its rotation independent of any power source. Shadows slithered along the rides, crawling and gliding, their presence omnipresent. The whispers became chants, reciting personal memories, secrets, and fears, echoing inside their heads. Rachel glimpsed her own face among the shadows, distorted in whispering words she didn't recognize. Emma, unable to resist, began murmuring responses to the whispers, while Daniel realized, with horror, that they were being absorbed into the carnival. Their sense of self, their ability to distinguish reality from hallucination, began to crumble. Desperate to escape, they sprinted toward the tree line, but the landscape twisted unnaturally. Paths looped back on themselves, roads and trails folding into impossible geometries. Each attempt to flee returned them to the Ferris wheel. Hours felt like days, and days felt like minutes. Exhaustion pressed upon them physically and mentally, a suffocating weight they could not shake. The carnival stretched endlessly, each shadowed figure moving silently in perfect synchronization, observing, patient, and unrelenting. Over time, they began noticing changes within themselves. Thoughts appeared that were not their own, dark suggestions, and urges. Glimpses of other people's memories intruded, places they had never been, faces they had never seen. Rachel saw her own distorted reflection in puddles and glass surfaces, expressions twisted in terror, mouthing words she hadn't spoken. Emma followed the whispers instinctively, and Daniel's rational mind began to fracture. They were becoming part of the carnival itself, losing distinction between self and shadow. By the seventh night, the carnival had become an endless maze. The Ferris wheel grew to monstrous proportions, rides stretching impossibly high, shadows crawling across its steel. Every scream, every whispered thought, was mirrored and amplified, forming a chorus of fear that pressed against their minds. Figures emerged from the fog, Children, adults, people they recognized from photos, all distorted and entrapped in the carnival's collection. Rachel realized they were not the first victims. The carnival had been collecting souls for decades, preserving fear itself. Desperation overtook them. They ran blindly, trying to reach civilization. Yet each road, each path, led back to the same place, the same Ferris wheel, the same shadows. Their exhaustion became unbearable, bodies trembling with panic. Fog thickened, twisting reality, making distance and direction meaningless. Time ceased to exist. They understood the horrifying truth: they were trapped. When authorities investigated later, the carnival had vanished without a trace. No evidence of tents, rides, or the friends remained. Locals spoke in whispers about the carnival that appears during certain summer nights, collecting the curious and the brave. Travelers reported faint carnival music, shadowy figures at the edge of vision, and whispers, calling their names long after leaving the area. Rachel, Emma, and Daniel were never seen again. The carnival waits, patient and cunning, feeding on fear, collecting memories, and trapping those who wander too close. Those who listen carefully on hot summer nights may hear faint screams and whispers in the fog, calling for help that will never come. It is a place that transforms curiosity into terror, summer nights into endless nightmares, and visitors into part of its eternal collection. Let's move to our fourth story. It began as a summer road trip for three friends, Lily, Marcus, and Johns, seeking adventure and escape from the pressures of college life. Their destination was a series of quiet towns and stretches of countryside, roads lined with dense forests and golden fields under the summer sun. The car was filled with laughter, music, and a sense of carefree freedom. But as they drove deeper into the forested routes, an unshakable feeling of being watched began to creep in. Subtle, yet persistent, like shadows brushing against the edges of their vision. Their curiosity led them to an abandoned train station, hidden among overgrown trees. Weathered wooden beams marked the platform, rusted rails disappearing into dense woods, and an eerie stillness clung to the area. Lily joked nervously about rumors. She had read stories of ghostly sightings and strange disappearances that had taken place decades ago. Marcus and John laughed, though their glances down the endless tracks betrayed unease. The air was heavy, scented with damp earth and rusting metal, and even the usual forest sounds seemed muted, as if the world itself had paused. As the afternoon waned, they explored the station further. The tracks stretched into the shadows, warped and moss-coated, seeming to go on forever. Lily imagined ghost trains once running here, their whistles echoing across the woods. John attempted humor to mask his unease, but the oppressive silence, the strange alignment of shadows, made even him pause. The sensation of being observed intensified with every step. Nightfall brought an unsettling calm, and they set up a small campsite near the station. The forest appeared alive, the trees swaying in the darkness as though whispering secrets, and shadows shifted subtly as if they had a purpose. Faint noises began, footsteps along the tracks, distant metallic screeches, a train horn that shouldn't exist. Lily shivered as fear pressed against her spine. Marcus insisted it was imagination, but the whispers grew louder, calling their names and speaking unintelligible phrases that chilled them to the bone. The next morning, daylight offered no relief. The station was silent, yet the footprints along the ground were unmistakable, deep, muddy, far too large to belong to any of them. The tracks seemed endless, vanishing into the dense forest. Even as they tried to maintain calm, the sense of being watched persisted. Shadows along the edges. A vision seemed to move independently, humanoid in shape, yet warped and indistinct. Objects near their campsite subtly shifted, as if the forest itself was alive and attentive. By the second night, fog rolled in, curling along the tracks and through the trees. Whispers returned, now clearly repeating their names and fears, pressing into their minds. Lily saw fleeting figures in the mist, humanoid but distorted, gliding silently along the rails. Every glance revealed new shapes, some hovering impossibly, some moving with unnatural speed. The oppressive weight of the presence left them unable to sleep, their hearts hammering as they clung to one another. Around midnight, a sound broke the stillness, the screech of metal on metal, like a train derailing, though no tracks connected to any active line. The noise grew louder, echoing through the woods. Shadows multiplied along the rails, stretching taller, more defined, yet featureless. Attempts to leave the area led only back to the same platform. Every path seemed warped, looping unnaturally, the station and its surroundings bending reality itself. By the third night, exhaustion and terror had begun to change them. Thoughts and fears not their own infiltrated their minds. Lily murmured phrases she hadn't spoken. Marcus imagined himself among the shadowy figures, and John's skepticism had vanished completely. The fog thickened, the tracks stretched endlessly, and the station appeared alive, responding to their presence. Figures emerged from the mist, gliding silently, faceless yet intimately aware of them. The whispers became chants, echoing memories, secrets, and anxieties, pressing on their minds with crushing intensity. Attempts to escape were futile. No matter which way they ran, they returned to the same platform, the same tracks, and the same shadows. Hours merged into endless time, every sound snapping twigs, distant whistles, rustling leaves amplified into a symphony of fear. The oppressive presence surrounded them from all sides, patient, relentless. The friends clung together, but the sense of control slipped away. The station had claimed them, trapping them in a looping reality where escape was impossible. By the fourth night, Lily, Marcus, and John had begun to lose their identities. Sleep and thought became meaningless. They existed only as part of the station's ecosystem of shadows and whispers. The tracks twisted into impossible geometries, stretching farther than reason could allow. Figures appeared and disappeared in the corners of their vision, humanoid but distorted. Every step they took seemed orchestrated by an unseen hand, leading them toward an inevitable fate. When locals later recounted the story, the station appeared abandoned and ordinary, its tracks overgrown and silent. Yet they warned of the haunted rails, a place where travelers occasionally vanished or returned changed, haunted by shadows and whispers. Faint train whistles, ghostly footsteps, and glimmering shapes along the rails were reported by those brave or foolish enough to pass through. Lily, Marcus, and John were never seen again. The abandoned station waits patiently, a living entity fed by fear and curiosity, capturing those who linger too long. Travelers sometimes report hearing their names whispered on quiet nights, faint silhouettes glimpsed in fog, and the unsettling sensation of being watched. The station, with its endless tracks and ever-shifting shadows, continues to claim the unwary, a timeless trap in the heart of the woods. Even now, when summer nights are still, and fog drifts along forgotten tracks, the whispers return. Those who venture near hear faint metallic screeches, footsteps that are not their own, and glimpses of shadowy figures moving silently among the trees. The station exists beyond the rules of reality, a place where time bends, and the curious become part of its haunting legacy. Lily, Marcus, and John remain trapped there, echoes in the fog and shadows, calling out for help that will never come. A warning to those who might follow in their footsteps. Let's move to our fifth story. It started as a seemingly ordinary summer vacation for college friends Ryan, Chloe, Marcus, and Jenahu had decided to spend a weekend at a remote lakeside cabin. The cabin was nestled in a dense forest, far from the nearest town, surrounded by tall pines and a glassy lake that mirrored the sky. The friends were excited, envisioning swimming, hiking, and nights spent around a campfire under the stars. The drive to the cabin was long, winding through empty highways and country roads lined with trees, their branches creating natural tunnels of green and shadow. Laughter filled the car, music playing from an old speaker, and the carefree energy of youth made the isolation feel exhilarating rather than unnerving. Upon arrival, the cabin appeared rustic, yet inviting, with weathered wood and a faint scent of pine and damp earth. The lake shimmered under the setting sun, and the forest stretched endlessly in every direction. They unpacked quickly, eager to explore before darkness fell. Chloe suggested a swim, and the group waded into the water, laughing as cool ripples lapped at their feet. Yet, despite the beauty, a subtle unease lingered, a sense of being watched. as though the forest itself held its breath and observed them silently. That evening, they lit a campfire on the shore, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. The crackling of the fire, the soft lapping of water, and the distant calls of nocturnal animals created a sense of peace. But strange sounds began to emerge from the forest. Distant snaps of twigs, rustling that seemed too deliberate to be animals. Ryan joked nervously, insisting it was just wildlife. But Jenna admitted she thought she had seen movement between the trees. Marcus and Chloe laughed, yet even they felt a prickle of anxiety. As darkness deepened, the lake took on a strange, reflective quality. Shadows appeared longer, stretching unnaturally, and the trees seemed to lean closer, their branches creaking like whispers. The friends shared uneasy glances but tried to brush off the feelings. Sleep came reluctantly, and that night Ryan awoke to a faint sound of footsteps along the shore, soft and deliberate. He nudged Chloe, pointing toward the shadows outside. But when she looked, nothing was there. The sense of being watched intensified, pressing on their minds with an invisible weight. The next day, the friends explored the surrounding forest. They discovered an old, crumbling dock that extended into the lake, partially submerged. Water lilies and weeds grew thickly around the edges, and the wooden planks were rotting, making each step uncertain. Chloe joked about ghost stories, recalling a legend of a drowned girl who haunted the lake, but her voice trembled slightly. Marcus laughed it off, though he felt uneasy as he glanced across the water. Certain he had seen something, a pale face, half submerged, staring at them from the depths. By afternoon, strange occurrences began to escalate. Ryan found odd scratches on the cabin door, fresh and deep, despite no one being outside. Chloe noticed shadows moving independently of the firelight, stretching across the cabin walls. Jenna swore she heard whispers calling her name from the lake, soft at first but growing clearer, insistent, and cold. The friends tried to remain rational, attributing the events to imagination or natural phenomena, but the tension built steadily, pressing against their sanity. That night, the fog rolled in thickly over the lake, obscuring the water and shore. The whispers returned, now almost intelligible, urging them to come closer. Stay. Join us. Ryan shivered as the temperature dropped unnaturally, though the night was warm. Shadows emerged from the fog, humanoid but distorted, gliding across the surface of the water and among the trees. Panic set in as Jenna screamed, seeing a shadow reach toward her, its faceless presence horrifyingly close. The friends attempted to leave the cabin, but the forest seemed to twist around them. Paths looped endlessly, returning them to the cabin. Despite their efforts, even the lake appeared larger, stretching impossibly into the fog, reflecting not just their images but twisted, distorted versions of themselves. Chloe realized with mounting fear that the lake and forest were alive with some malevolent presence, feeding on fear and curiosity, reshaping reality itself. Desperation took over as they attempted to escape again. Every path led back to the cabin, or the dock. The whispers intensified, recounting personal secrets, fears, and memories. Shadows converged from every direction, forming humanoid shapes that were increasingly distinct, yet impossibly distorted. The friends felt themselves being drawn toward the lake. Unable to resist, their minds and bodies pressured by an unseen force. By the third night, exhaustion and terror had begun to warp their perception of time. They could not distinguish between hours and minutes, each second stretching into endless dread. The shadows now interacted with them, directly grasping at their clothes, tugging at their limbs, whispering words they had never heard but knew intimately. Ryan, Chloe, Marcus, and Jenna began to realize that their identities were slipping, merging with the haunting presence of the lake and forest. Sleep offered no relief. The whispers followed even in closed eyes. The lake itself seemed sentient, its waters darkening unnaturally, ripples forming faces that screamed silently. From the depths, shadows emerged and glided toward the dock, yet vanished when looked at directly. Each time they tried to flee, the forest shifted, guiding them back. Every tree, rock, and ripple in the water became part of an orchestrated maze, trapping them. Panic and terror fused with the environment, a feedback loop that sapped their will. By the fourth night, the friends had nearly lost all sense of reality. The whispers were now constant, inseparable from thought, echoing every fear and memory back at them in distorted tones. They saw their reflections in the lake, grotesque and twisted, mouthing words they had never spoken. The shadows around them multiplied, merging with the fog, extending across the lake and forest, becoming an oppressive force that was nearly physical in its weight. Attempts to escape were futile. Even when running toward the distant road, the forest bent unnaturally, returning them to the cabin and dock. Objects moved subtly, as though alive, repositioning themselves to maintain the illusion of choice and freedom. The lake pulsed with an otherworldly glow, and figures began to emerge fully from the fog, pale, humanoid, yet distorted, their faces featureless and twisted in silent screams. The friends understood that they were being absorbed into the lake's collection, becoming part of the forest and water's malevolent consciousness. Desperation turned to helpless acceptance. Their thoughts no longer belonged solely to them. Chloe murmured phrases she had never known. Marcus imagined himself as one of the lake's shadows. Jenna saw her body dissolve into fog and water. Ryan tried to hold on, but even his identity, fragmented under the weight of the forest's oppressive presence. Time ceased to exist as the lake, forest, and shadows formed an eternal loop, ensuring they could never leave. Years later, travelers occasionally report the lake appearing unusually still and quiet, surrounded by thick fog even on clear days. Some claim to hear faint whispers calling names, laughter mingled with cries for help. Occasionally, shadows are glimpsed, among the trees or gliding over the water, humanoid yet impossible, moving in ways that defy reality. The cabin remains abandoned, yet some swear it is occupied by figures who vanish when approached. The story of Ryan, Chloe, Marcus, and Jenna serves as a chilling warning. Some places are alive, aware, and patient. The lake waits in silence, the forest presses close, and the fog carries whispers of those who have been trapped. Curiosity and fear draw the unsuspecting in, and once there, escape is an illusion. The friends became part of the lake's consciousness. Shadows among shadows, their voices now one with the whispers that haunt the foggy nights. Even now, during quiet summer nights, the lake shimmers unnaturally under the moonlight. Travelers report hearing faint cries, distant footsteps, and whispers calling names long forgotten. The cabin, the dock, and the lake remain patient, always waiting for new visitors. Ryan, Chloe, Marcus, and Jenna are no longer seen but remain present, part of the lake, the forest, and the mist. Their story endures as a warning. Curiosity can lead to obsession, exploration to entrapment, and a seemingly innocent summer vacation to an eternal nightmare. Let's move to our sixth story. It was the start of a long-awaited summer vacation for four friends, Sophia, Liam, and Rachel, who had planned a road trip across the countryside to escape the monotony of city life. Their plan was simple: rent a secluded cabin near a small, picturesque town, enjoy days hiking, swimming in the nearby river, and nights under the stars. The drive itself was filled with laughter, music, and playful debates about the best route to take. Yet, as the city skyline disappeared behind them, a subtle unease settled over the car, an inexplicable weight that none could shake. The cabin they arrived at appeared rustic and isolated, surrounded by dense forests and a glistening river. The air smelled of pine, damp earth, and something faintly metallic. They unpacked quickly, eager to explore before the sun set. Ethan suggested a short hike to a nearby cliff overlooking the river. The path was narrow, lined with overgrown roots, and the forest shadows stretched unnaturally in the fading light. Sophia jokingly mentioned a local legend of hikers disappearing or seeing strange figures, but her voice trembled slightly. Even Liam, usually the skeptic, felt a chill crawl up his spine. That evening, they lit a small fire on the porch and tried to relax, but faint sounds emerged from the forest: snapping branches, whispers that seemed almost human, and subtle rustling in the underbrush. Ethan claimed it was animals, but the whispers grew louder, forming patterns that unnervingly resembled their own names. The four friends exchanged anxious glances, realizing something was watching them. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by dreams that felt too real. glimpses of distorted figures in the forest, calling their names, urging them to come closer. The next day, subtle signs of the cabin's malevolent presence became undeniable. Objects had shifted overnight, chairs moved, windows slightly opened despite being locked. Sophia noticed scratches on the floorboards, deep and deliberate. The forest around the cabin appeared alive. Shadows moved independently of natural light, stretching and twisting. Trying to rationalize, they ventured along the riverbank. The water shimmered unnaturally, reflections distorted into humanoid shapes, pale and watching. Rachel stopped abruptly, swearing she saw a figure among the trees, vanished the moment she focused on it. As night fell, the fog from the river crept toward the cabin, rolling like a living thing. Whispers returned, now intelligible, urging them to come closer, stay, join us. Ethan saw pale, distorted forms gliding across the water, humanoid yet impossible. Sophia heard voices calling her name, familiar tones twisted into menacing commands. Panic set in, and they realized the cabin was no ordinary place. It was a living entity, feeding on fear and curiosity. Attempts to leave proved futile. Paths looped unnaturally, returning them to the cabin no matter the direction they ran. The river seemed impossibly vast, reflecting a distorted reality, while shadows converged from the forest and fog. Each step felt guided by an unseen hand, drawing them toward the cabin. By the third night, exhaustion and terror began to warp their perception of time. Sleep was impossible. Whispers recounted memories, fears, and secrets with unerring accuracy. Shadows moved across walls, ceilings, and floors, coalescing into humanoid forms that silently observed them. Desperation turned to helplessness. The forest twisted, the river stretched unnaturally, and the fog thickened, pressing them inward. Reflections in the water morphed into grotesque versions of themselves, silently screaming. Every escape attempt ended with the cabin looming before them, shadows closing in, and whispers invading their minds. Their identities began to fray. Rachel spoke in voices she did not recognize. Liam imagined himself among the shadows, and Sophia. And Ethan could no longer separate reality from hallucination. The cabin, river, and forest had merged into a malevolent entity, bending space, time, and thought itself. By the fourth night, they had nearly lost all sense of reality. Shadows glided above the river and through the fog, faceless yet disturbingly intelligent. Attempts to resist were met with overwhelming force. The environment seemed alive, reacting to their fear. The forest warped paths, the river pulsed unnaturally, and the cabin's walls twisted. Ethan, Sophia, Liam, and Rachel realized they had become part of something eternal, absorbed into the forest, river, and fog. Their thoughts and fears were no longer entirely their own. Years later, locals speak of the haunted lakeside cabin, warning travelers to avoid the area. Some report faint whispers calling names, footsteps in the fog, or pale distorted humanoid shadows gliding over the water. Reflections reveal faces that do not belong to any living being. The cabin, river, and forest remain sentient, patient, and watchful, feeding on fear and curiosity. Ethan, Sophia, Liam, and Rachel are no longer seen, but their voices mingle with the whispers carried across the lake, part of the eternal trap that waits for the next unsuspecting visitors. Even today, on quiet summer nights, the lake shimmers unnaturally, shadows glide silently, reflections twist into grotesque forms, and the cabin stands alone, patient and eternal. Those who dare approach sense unseen eyes, the stretching of time, and the oppressive weight of a presence that defies reality. The friends remain part of this malevolent consciousness, a warning of how curiosity can lead to obsession, exploration to entrapment, and a seemingly innocent summer vacation into an eternal nightmare. It was supposed to be the ultimate summer adventure. 5 college friends Is, Mia, Jordan, Lily, and Noah decided to explore a long-abandoned railway line rumored to have been closed after a series of mysterious disappearances decades ago. The track snaked through dense forests, overgrown with vines and roots, and crossed rickety bridges that spanned misty ravines. Legends claimed that travelers along this line were sometimes never seen again. but the thrill of adventure and a love for urban exploration outweighed their fear. The friends arrived just before sunset. The forest bathed in an amber glow. The rails, though rusted, gleamed faintly, reflecting the fading light. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and moss, and an uneasy silence hung over the area. As they walked along the tracks, laughter and joking attempts to lighten the mood barely concealed a rising tension. Shadows among the trees seemed to move independently, and the distant sound of wind through the treetops carried almost human whispers. Their first night on the line was uneventful, but the forest's oppressive presence grew. They set up small tents near the tracks, fire crackling in the center of their circle. Yet even here, the shadows seemed alive, stretching unnaturally toward them. Mia noticed that the rails ahead appeared slightly warped, curving in ways that seemed impossible, given the landscape. Jordan laughed nervously, saying the rust had warped the metal over time. But a deep unease had begun to creep into their minds. The following day, curiosity drove them further along the track. They found a train tunnel, pitch black, and almost swallowing the daylight around its entrance. Lily hesitated, citing the stories of people disappearing near tunnels, but Alex insisted they explore it. As they stepped into the darkness, the sound of their footsteps echoed unnaturally, each footfall seemingly followed by another, distant echo that did not match their own movements. Whispers grew louder, yet no source was visible. Their flashlights illuminated the walls, revealing faded graffiti and deep scratch marks etched haphazardly across the stone. Inside the tunnel, the temperature dropped sharply. Breath came visible in the beam of their lights. Jordan thought he saw figures at the far end, pale, hunched, humanoid, but each time he blinked, they were gone. Mia felt eyes watching her from the shadows, and a chill ran down her spine. Lily suggested they turn back, but Alex's obsession with discovery kept them moving forward. The farther they went, the more distorted the echoes became. Laughter and whispers, indecipherable, yet intimately familiar, pressed into their minds. When they emerged on the other side, the forest seemed subtly changed. Trees loomed closer together, the path narrower. The forest floor was unnaturally quiet. No birds, no insects. The friends realized that even the air felt heavier, as though their presence had been noticed and recorded by the very forest itself. As night fell, the railway became a different kind of threat. Shadows moved across the tracks independently of the friends' positions, sometimes appearing to step off the rails and vanish into the trees. That night, their tents shook with wind or something else. Whispers carried through the darkness, forming words that chilled them. Stay, join us, never leave. Alex tried to dismiss it, but even he felt panic rising. Noah swore he saw a pale figure watching from the tree line, faceless and grotesque, standing impossibly still. As the friends huddled together, sleep became impossible. Every time their eyes closed, images of shadowy figures crawling along the rails haunted their vision. The next day, the forest seemed alive with intent. Every turn along the railway track brought them back to areas they had already explored. Yet the landmarks had subtly shifted the shape of a tree, the placement of rocks. It became clear that the railway line itself was a trap, reshaping reality to disorient intruders. The friends argued about what to do, fear starting to fracture their cohesion. Even their attempts to climb off the tracks into the trees seemed futile. The forest guided them inexorably back to the rails. By the third night, tension had reached a fever pitch. The friends could no longer tell if what they saw was real. Pale figures appeared intermittently on the tracks, humanoid but twisted, their movements unnerving in their smooth, fluid motions. Shadows stretched impossibly, and whispers became voices recounting secrets only the friends themselves could know. Their sanity began to fray, as every sense was distorted: hearing, sight, even touch. The rails themselves seemed to pulse, almost breathing. Alive with malevolent intent, desperation forced them to move further along the line. But every attempt to escape ended with the same result. The tracks curved back toward the tunnel they had entered days earlier, the forest shifting subtly to prevent them from leaving. Noah and Lily began to panic visibly, insisting that the railway was not merely abandoned but sentient, feeding on fear. Alex's determination to explore transformed into obsession. He could not stop walking, as if pulled by the malevolent energy that infused the line. As darkness fell on the fourth night, the railway became a surreal nightmare. Shadows merged with fog that rolled in from unseen valleys, and figures that were humanoid yet featureless glided silently along the tracks. The friends tried to stick together, but hallucinations tore at their perception. Familiar voices became distorted commands. Fleeting figures appeared at the edge of vision, and the echoes of their footsteps multiplied into hundreds of phantom steps. Every shadow was alive, watching, pressing inward. Eventually, exhaustion and terror led to fragmentation. Mia imagined herself merging with the fog. Noah felt his identity fracturing with each echo. Lily screamed at things that did not exist, and Jordan's sense of reality was warped by fleeting glimpses of figures that mimicked his movements perfectly, but were grotesquely distorted. Alex walked further ahead, drawn irresistibly by the whispers, his body moving even when his mind screamed to stop. The railway and forest had consumed their perception entirely, bending reality to trap them. By the fifth night, they were entirely at the mercy of the railway. The tunnel and tracks seemed endless, looping impossibly. Whispers became omnipresent, recounting every fear and secret. Shadows pressed from all sides, and reflections on water puddles along the tracks revealed distorted versions of themselves, silently screaming. Attempts to flee led invariably back to the same points, the railway's sentience ensuring they could not escape. Time stretched and distorted. Minutes felt like hours, hours like days, years later. Explorers occasionally find remnants of the abandoned railway line, sometimes seeing pale, humanoid figures in the fog or glimpsing shadows that move independently. Those who report these sightings describe a disorienting sense of time and space, whispers calling names, and an oppressive feeling of being watched. Alex, Mia, Jordan, Lily, and Noah were never seen again, their fates a chilling reminder of the railway's sentience. Travelers are warned to avoid the line, as curiosity can lead to obsession, exploration to entrapment, and a summer adventure to an eternal nightmare. Even now, on quiet summer nights, the abandoned railway stretches endlessly, its shadows gliding silently over the tracks, fog curling along the rails, and whispers carried by the wind. The forest surrounding it waits patiently, reshaping reality and drawing the unwary into its trap. The friends are gone, yet their voices linger in the mist, a cautionary tale of the horrors that lie hidden along forgotten rails, where shadows and whispers consume the curious and transform them into part of the line itself. Let's move to our 8th story. It started as a spontaneous summer trip for 4 friends, Isabella, Marcus, Tyler, and Naomi, who had rented a small lakeside cabin in the remote woods, far from cell service and city life. The idea was simple: disconnect, swim, hike, and spend long evenings around a campfire, swapping stories and laughing until the stars came out. The cabin itself was rustic but charming, perched at the edge of a lake, so still it mirrored the dense forest surrounding it. At first, everything felt idyllic, a perfect escape from the pressures of school and work. The first night, however, brought subtle unease. As they gathered around the fire, Isabella noticed a thick fog rolling in across the water, moving unnaturally fast, hugging the shoreline and pressing toward the cabin. Naomi joked about the fog spirits she had read about in old local tales, but the humor failed to mask her own unease. Shadows along the tree line seemed too deep, too deliberate, shifting slightly when no wind blew. Tyler, ever the skeptic, waved off the sensation, attributing it to the eeriness of isolation. Yet as night deepened, faint whispers seemed to float across the lake, soft and almost melodic, calling their names with a cadence that sent chills down their spines. The next morning, the friends attempted to shake off the experience. They hiked through the dense forest surrounding the lake, the moss-covered ground damp beneath their boots. The forest, though beautiful, had a strange quality. Trees seemed to lean unnaturally toward the lake, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky, as if reaching for something unseen. Birds and insects were notably absent, leaving the forest unnervingly silent, except for the crunch of their own footsteps. As they reached a clearing, Tyler found a small, weathered wooden sign, partially buried under leaves. The inscription was faded, but the words "do not enter" were just discernible. A shiver ran through the group. Isabella argued that it was probably a warning from hunters or campers. But a sense of dread lingered. That evening, the fog returned, denser and more aggressive, curling into the forest and over the water. The friends tried to light the campfire, but the flames flickered violently, casting long, grotesque shadows that seemed to move independently. Naomi swore she saw movement in the fog, humanoid shapes, gliding silently over the water, stopping just at the edge of visibility. Isabella and Marcus strained their eyes, but the shapes disappeared as soon as they tried to focus on them. The whispers returned, clearer now, forming phrases that were unmistakable, yet unintelligible in their meaning. Fear began to seep into the group, though they attempted to maintain a sense of rationality. The following day, the atmosphere of the cabin had changed. Objects were subtly displaced, chairs moved slightly, doors ajar that had been locked, small scratches along the wooden floors. Tyler suggested it was simply the wind, but even he felt the prickling sensation of being watched. The lake, normally placid, seemed to ripple unnaturally, reflecting shapes that did not belong to any of them. Isabella swore she saw a pale, faceless figure standing across the water, motionless yet undeniably present. When the group looked again, it was gone. Naomi, increasingly anxious, suggested that they leave immediately, but a growing sense of unease had started to cloud their judgment, and leaving now seemed impossibly difficult. As night fell again, the fog pressed closer to the cabin. The friends huddled together, the fire's light struggling against the oppressive darkness. Whispers grew louder, almost conversational, twisting familiar tones into something threatening. Marcus glimpsed figures in the mist, elongated and distorted, gliding effortlessly across the lake's surface. The shapes did not interact with the water, they floated, defying gravity and logic. Every time they blinked or turned their heads, the figures would vanish, only to appear somewhere else, closer, just beyond the edge of perception. The feeling of being hunted became overwhelming. Sleep offered no relief. Each of them dreamed vividly of the fog consuming them, of hands emerging from the water to drag them beneath the surface, of pale figures calling their names with voices both familiar and distorted. Waking, they found themselves disoriented, unsure of how much time had passed. The boundaries of day and night, reality and nightmare, had begun to blur. Even when they tried to remain rational, subtle changes in the cabin and forest reinforced the sense of a malevolent presence manipulating their environment. On the third day, exploration became unavoidable. The friends decided to follow the lake's edge, hoping to find a way out, or at least understand the source of the unnatural fog. The shoreline twisted unnaturally, paths that should have led away simply looped back toward the cabin. The forest seemed alive, branches moving as if to obstruct them, the ground subtly reshaping itself beneath their feet. Figures appeared in the mist, humanoid but grotesque, their forms shifting fluidly, faces featureless yet somehow recognizable. Every attempt to escape left them trapped, the lake and forest guiding them inexorably back to the cabin. Fear transformed into panic as night fell for the third time. Whispers became voices recounting their deepest fears and memories, merging seamlessly with their thoughts. Shadows stretched unnaturally, gliding across walls, floorboards, and ceiling, sometimes coalescing into semi-humanoid forms that seemed to watch and judge. Each friend felt the creeping influence of the cabin, the lake, and the fog pressing into their consciousness, eroding the barriers of reality. Attempts to flee resulted only in returning to the same locations, as if the forest itself had become a living trap. By the fourth night, sanity began to fray. Naomi imagined herself as one with the fog. Marcus felt his identity splitting into multiple selves. Tyler screamed at shadows no one else could see. And Isabella's perception of time had warped so completely she could no longer distinguish hours from minutes. Figures emerged from the lake, pale and featureless, gliding over water and fog, observing with an intelligence that terrified them. Each step the friends took seemed orchestrated, the fog and forest guiding them toward an inescapable fate. Attempts at rationality failed entirely. Even reflections in the lake, once serene and beautiful, had become grotesque, displaying distorted versions of themselves that screamed silently. The fog thickened, shadows multiplied, and whispers filled every corner of their minds. The cabin, forest and lake were no longer mere locations. They had become sentient, feeding on fear, curiosity, and the friends' very identities. Reality warped with each step, each sound, each glance into the foggy distance. By the fifth night, the friends were entirely ensnared, their identities blurred, their consciousness intertwined with the malevolent presence that permeated the lake and forest. Time no longer made sense, each moment stretching endlessly, each attempt to flee rerouted by unseen forces. Shadows pressed inward from all sides, humanoid yet distorted, merging seamlessly with the fog and darkness. Whispers recounted memories, and fears with terrifying precision, eroding the last remnants of their sanity. Years later, locals speak of the Fog Lake cabin, warning travelers to avoid the area entirely. Some report seeing pale, faceless figures gliding over the water, hearing whispers carried on the wind, or glimpsing shadows that move independently of natural light. The friends Isabella, Marcus, Tyler, and Naomi were never seen again. Their presence, now part of the lake's and forest's malevolent consciousness. Their voices linger in the mist, a chilling reminder of the danger of curiosity, the peril of summer exploration, and the power of a place that bends reality to consume the unwary. Even today, the lake reflects ghostly shapes, shadows glide silently, over water and through fog, and the cabin stands patient and eternal. The forest reshapes paths, the fog swirls with intent, and the whispers continue, drawing the curious into the inescapable grasp of the malevolent environment. Those who approach feel the weight of unseen eyes, the stretching of time, and the oppressive sense of being watched. Isabella, Marcus, Tyler, and Naomi are gone, yet their presence lingers, intertwined with the fog, the lake, and the cabin. A cautionary tale of a summer adventure that became a permanent nightmare. Let's move to our 9 story. It was mid-July when 5 friends, Ethan, Lily, Daniel, Chloe, and Marquez decided to spend their summer vacation in a small coastal town known for its abandoned lighthouse perched on jagged cliffs. The lighthouse had been decommissioned decades ago, shrouded in rumors of disappearances, strange lights at night, and sailors claiming to hear voices calling from the cliffs. For the group, it was the perfect mix of adventure and thrill, a way to escape the mundane city life. Their plan was simple: rent a modest seaside cottage, explore the cliffs, and visit the lighthouse, especially as the sun dipped below the horizon. Their first day was uneventful, filled with laughter and the salty temps of the sea breeze. The cliffs were majestic, the waves crashing against rocks below, creating an almost hypnotic rhythm. The lighthouse, though weathered and covered in peeling paint, loomed over them with an imposing presence. Daniel, fascinated by history, remarked on the eerie charm of abandoned places. But Chloe shivered, uneasy about the stories she had heard online. Marcus brushed it off, insisting that the rumors were just local folklore. Still, the air around the lighthouse felt heavier than the rest of the cliffs, and shadows from the setting sun stretched in strange directions across the rocks. That evening, as they set up a small fire near the cliffs to watch the sunset, Lily noticed faint lights flickering inside the lighthouse windows. At first, they assumed it was a reflection of the sun or distant boats. But the lights seemed too deliberate, blinking in rhythm as if signaling. Ethan tried to rationalize it, suggesting it was leftover wiring or reflections, but unease began to seep into the group. As night fell, the lighthouse loomed in darkness, and faint whispers seemed to ride the wind from its direction. No one could make out the words, but the cadence and tone were unmistakably human. Curiosity eventually overcame fear. The next day, the friends approached the lighthouse, the iron gate rusted and hanging loosely on its hinges. Inside, the air smelled of salt, mildew, and something faintly metallic. The spiral staircase leading to the top was covered in debris. But they ascended, drawn by a mix of fascination and unspoken compulsion. With each step, the air seemed colder, heavier. Chloe began hearing soft footsteps behind her, matching her own rhythm exactly, but when she turned, no one was there. Shadows along the walls seemed to twist unnaturally, elongating and then snapping back as though the structure itself was alive at the top. The lighthouse lantern room revealed a panoramic view of the cliffs and sea, yet the group felt suddenly isolated. The horizon appeared warped, distant waves curving unnaturally, the cliffs stretching into impossible angles. Marcus laughed nervously, claiming it was just their imagination, but even he could not deny the sensation of being watched. Then came the whispering, louder and more intelligible. Ethan froze, recognizing the cadence as calling his full name, urging him to step closer to the edge of the lighthouse balcony. Lily grabbed his arm, pulling him back. But the pull of something unseen was palpable, pressing against their minds. Descending from the lighthouse did not bring relief. The path back to the cottage seemed longer, the cliffs rearranged subtly. The ocean below roared with unnatural intensity, waves crashing in patterns that seemed almost communicative. Daniel noticed scratch marks on rocks that had not been there before, deep and deliberate, as though something or someone had been watching their approach and departure. Chloe felt invisible fingers graze her shoulder in the wind, and Marcus glimpsed fleeting pale figures moving along the cliff edges, their forms humanoid but distorted. Fear began to unravel their cohesion. That night, the whispers continued. Sleep was impossible. Every time their eyes closed, they dreamed of the lighthouse stretching impossibly high, spiraling into blackness, figures gliding effortlessly along the stairs, and voices calling with intimate knowledge of their fears. When they awoke, small, things had changed. Rocks shifted slightly along the paths they had walked. Doors in the cottage were ajar, and strange markings appeared on walls and floors. The environment seemed to anticipate their movements, bending subtly to keep them contained. Over the next few days, exploration and attempts to leave the town became increasingly futile. Paths that should have led to the highway looped back to the cliffs, and the lighthouse appeared closer, no matter which direction they traveled. The friends started experiencing hallucinations. Shadows stretched into humanoid forms. Cliffs seemed to rise and fall like waves, and whispers recounted private memories and fears with uncanny accuracy. Daniel's skepticism eroded first. He began muttering to himself, convinced the lighthouse was alive. Ethan, normally logical, found himself pacing the cliffs in trance-like states. Drawn toward the structure, by the fourth night, panic overtook rational thought. Lily and Chloe swore they saw their own reflections in the waves twisting into pale, faceless figures. The whispers became voices, pressing into their minds, commanding, mocking, warning. Marcus disappeared briefly, reappearing hours later, with no memory of leaving, his expression blank and eyes hollow. The lighthouse had begun to reshape reality entirely, warping space and time, and the cliffs and sea conspired to disorient and trap them. The friends could not trust their senses. What was real, and what was a projection of the lighthouse's influence, was impossible to determine. Attempts to flee were thwarted at every turn. Paths became labyrinthine, cliffs stretched impossibly, and the lighthouse always remained in sight, looming over them like a predator. Ethan began to perceive the shadows as sentient, moving independently, merging with the fog that rolled in from the sea. Lily felt whispers pressing against her skull, recounting secrets no one else could know. Chloe and Daniel could no longer differentiate between hallucination and reality, every reflection, shadow, and whisper a potential threat. The friends were slowly being absorbed into the environment, their identities fraying. On the fifth night, the lighthouse's influence reached its peak. The air shimmered with an unnatural energy. Shadows glided across the cliffs and water, merging with fog and moonlight. The friends felt themselves losing control of their own bodies, drawn inexorably toward the lighthouse balcony. Figures appeared at impossible angles, pale and humanoid, silently watching and judging. Whispers no longer carried words, but emotions: fear, despair, helplessness, pressing into their minds like waves of freezing water. Each step, each breath, each heartbeat reinforced the sensation that the lighthouse was alive and hungry. By the sixth night, Ethan, Lily, Daniel, Chloe, and Marcus were entirely ensnared. Time lost meaning. Minutes stretched into hours, hours into days. Shadows merged with fog and waves, forming indistinguishable entities that flowed effortlessly across cliffs and water. Reflections in the sea distorted their faces, twisting them into grotesque parodies of themselves. Attempts at communication faltered as voices in their heads overrode speech. Their identities were no longer stable. They were becoming part of the lighthouse's consciousness, absorbed into its malevolent will. Years later, the lighthouse still stands, abandoned yet watched. Locals warn travelers of strange lights at night, whispers carried by the wind, and figures glimpsed along the cliffs. Those who investigate often vanish, their fates a chilling reminder of the structure's sentience. Ethan, Lily, Daniel, Chloe, and Marcus were never seen again, yet some claim that their voices echo in the wind, warning the curious away from the cliffs. The lighthouse, cliffs, and sea remain alive, patient and eternal, feeding on fear, curiosity, and the souls of those drawn too close. Even today, on foggy summer nights, the lighthouse seems to pulse with unseen energy. Shadows glide silently along the cliffs, reflections twist unnaturally in the water, and whispers beckon the unwary. The structure reshapes reality to trap the curious, drawing them into its inescapable grasp. The friends are gone, yet their presence lingers, intertwined with the lighthouse, fog, and cliffs, a cautionary tale of how a summer adventure can become an eternal nightmare. Let's move to our 10 story. It began with a summer road trip for 6 friends, Ryan, Sophia, Kevin, Megan, Jared, and Tasha, who decided to explore a series of small towns along an old railway that had been long abandoned after a tragic accident. Decades prior, local legends spoke of strange disappearances, ghostly sightings, and unexplainable sounds along the tracks at night. For the friends, it was a mix of adventure, thrill, and curiosity. A chance to capture something extraordinary on camera while enjoying their last vacation together before university ended. The railway line, snaking through dense forests and open fields, had a haunting charm, and they were determined to explore it fully. Their journey began mid-afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the rusted rails. The towns were nearly deserted, giving an unsettling quiet to the roads and train stations. Ryan, eager to document everything, carried a camcorder, while Sophia kept a detailed journal, noting every minor oddity. Kevin and Megan laughed nervously at the overgrown tracks and graffiti-covered stations, brushing off the local legends. Tasha and Jared, more sensitive to the stories, couldn't shake the sensation of being watched as they walked along the tracks. The air itself seemed charged with anticipation, a stillness that was unnatural in its intensity. That first night, they set up a small campsite near a long-abandoned station. The buildings were crumbling, the roofs sagging, and the platforms overrun with weeds. As twilight descended, shadows stretched across the broken timbers, merging with the fog that began rolling in from the surrounding forest. Megan noticed a faint, rhythmic tapping sound echoing along the rails. At first, they thought it was wildlife, but the cadence was too regular, almost deliberate. Ryan aimed his camcorder at the tracks, hoping to capture something interesting. But the footage revealed only faint streaks of light and unnerving shadows that didn't correspond with any of them. The following day, curiosity pushed them deeper. Along the tracks, they discovered an old tunnel, its entrance partially collapsed but still accessible. The air inside was heavy with moisture and mildew, carrying the faint scent of iron and decay. As they ventured further, the sound of water dripping echoed in irregular patterns, and faint scratching noises seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Tasha whispered that she felt a presence, a sentient awareness, observing them. The group laughed nervously at her comment, but each step forward increased the sense of unease. Shadows twisting unnaturally along the tunnel walls. Emerging from the tunnel, the friends noticed a subtle shift in the environment. Trees along the tracks seemed closer together, the sunlight filtering through their branches in distorted patterns. Even the familiar towns they had passed appeared subtly different. The colors muted, the buildings slightly warped. They joked about time distortions and optical illusions, but the creeping sense of dread was undeniable. That night, while resting near the tracks, Ryan's camcorder picked up faint whispering voices calling their names. Though no one else seemed to hear anything, the footage showed brief flickers of figures standing just beyond the reach of the FIRELIGHT. By the third day, the railway's influence intensified. Walks that should have taken minutes stretched into hours, paths looping back to familiar yet subtly altered points. The group began experiencing hallucinations, glimpses of shadowy figures moving independently of natural light, reflections in puddles showing twisted, distorted versions of themselves, and whispers recounting intimate fears. Megan swore she saw a pale figure standing on the platform behind them, faceless and unnervingly still, disappearing whenever anyone tried to focus on it. The friends' sense of reality began to erode. As night fell on the fourth day, terror took hold. Shadows elongated across the tracks and forest floor, moving with intent and following their every step. The fog thickened, curling along the rails and through the gaps in the forest, concealing figures that seemed humanoid but grotesquely distorted. Kevin attempted to maintain a rational explanation, attributing the sights and sounds to exhaustion and stress, but even he could not deny the oppressive atmosphere. Whispering voices became intelligible, calling out secrets, fears, and memories no one else could know. Each friend felt individually targeted, the railway feeding on their anxiety. Attempts to flee along the tracks were futile. Paths twisted. The forest reshaped itself subtly, but inexorably, guiding them back to the abandoned stations and tunnels. Every detour led them to the same unsettling points, reinforcing the railway's sentience. The friends began seeing figures more clearly, pale, faceless humanoid forms, gliding silently along the rails, sometimes appearing in their peripheral vision, other times reflected in puddles or metallic surfaces. The longer they stayed, the more the line of reality warped. Time stretched and contracted unpredictably. Minutes felt like hours, hours like days. By the fifth night, exhaustion and fear had fractured their group cohesion. Megan and Tasha attempted to stay together, but even close contact did not dispel the overwhelming dread. Ryan, obsessed with capturing footage, wandered ahead alone, drawn by faint whispers that promised answers. Ethan felt his identity blurring. Every glance in the fog revealed distorted duplicates of himself, screaming silently or gesturing him forward. Shadows merged with the fog and the trees, forming semi-humanoid entities that pressed in on all sides. The railway was no longer merely abandoned, it was alive, aware, and intent on consuming them. As the sixth night fell, their attempts at reason failed completely. Whispering voices filled their minds, recounting every personal fear and secret with chilling accuracy. Reflections, shadows, and faint silhouettes moved independently, their presence reinforcing a growing, inescapable paranoia. The friends' perception of time and space became increasingly distorted. Loops forming along the tracks, the forest bending impossibly to guide them back. Each friend began to perceive the shadows as sentient, following, observing, sometimes mimicking movements in grotesque ways. By the seventh night, the friends were entirely ensnared. The railway, tunnels, stations, and surrounding forest had fused into a single malevolent entity, feeding on fear, curiosity, and obsession. The friends' identities fragmented, consciousness blending with the environment. Whispers became omnipresent, pressing against their minds and eroding the last vestiges of self-control. Shadows coalesced into humanoid yet distorted forms, gliding effortlessly over tracks, platforms, and through fog. The camcorder footage captured fleeting glimpses of their faces contorted in terror, the environment stretching and looping unnaturally around them. Years later, travelers report seeing faint lights along the abandoned railway, hearing whispers carried by the wind, and glimpsing pale, faceless figures along the tracks. Ryan, Sophia, Kevin, Megan, Jared, and Tasha were never seen again. Locals avoid the line entirely, warning that curiosity leads to obsession, and obsession to entrapment. The abandoned railway remains patient and eternal, reshaping reality to trap the unwary, consuming those who wander too far, and feeding on fear and paranoia. Even today, the rusted rails stretch endlessly into the mist. Shadows glide silently along the tracks, and whispers echo faintly on summer nights. The railway remains alive, a malevolent entity watching, reshaping, and waiting for the next group of curious adventurers. The friends are gone, yet their presence lingers. Absorbed into the environment, a chilling warning of how a summer road trip can transform into an eternal nightmare. Let's move to our 11th story. It all began when 4 college friends, Mara, Simon, and Jenna, decided to spend their summer vacation exploring an abandoned mountain resort deep in the Rockies. The resort, closed abruptly decades ago, following a mysterious fire, had long been the subject of local legends, guests vanishing overnight, staff reporting strange apparitions, and hikers claiming to hear eerie music floating from the burned-out halls. Excited by the thrill of urban exploration and documenting something supernatural, the friends packed their gear, cameras, and notebooks, intending to spend a week investigating the site and capturing evidence of the paranormal. The first day was deceptively calm. The path to the resort wound through dense pine forests, the smell of wildflowers mixing with the crisp mountain air. As they approached the property, the outline of the once grand resort came into view: blackened timber, shattered windows, and a crumbling stone facade. Simon, always the skeptic, mocked the legends, joking about ghost stories for tourists. But Mara and Jenna felt a peculiar chill, as if the mountain itself were watching them. The resort loomed over them like a silent sentinel, and even the wind seemed to carry whispers too faint to discern. Exploring the lobby, the friends noted the destruction left by the fire: charred furniture, soot-covered floors, and peeling wallpaper. Faded photographs of smiling guests lined the walls, some scorched beyond recognition. Jenna noticed one photo in particular, a group of people posing in front of the grand staircase, and swore she saw a figure move in the background, though Alex insisted it was just her imagination. They set up cameras and recorded audio, eager to catch even the faintest hint of paranormal activity. The first night passed quietly, but the sense of being watched never left them. The second day brought subtle but unnerving occurrences. Doors creaked open on their own, a chandelier swayed despite the absence of wind, and faint music, like a piano playing in a distant hall, echoed through the empty corridors. Mara felt a cold hand brush against her shoulder, yet when she spun around, no one was there. Simon, increasingly unsettled, admitted he was beginning to question his own skepticism. Shadows moved independently of the light, and the air felt thick, almost alive. The friends began to feel an invisible pressure pushing them toward the old ballroom on the second floor, a place the local legends claimed had been the epicenter of the resort's misfortunes. By the third day, their investigation had grown tense. They discovered a hidden staircase leading to a basement, the entrance partially blocked by debris. The basement air was heavy with smoke residue and a faint metallic scent. Faint, incomprehensible whispers seemed to emanate from the walls, sometimes forming words just out of reach. Alex noticed footprints appearing and disappearing on the dust-covered floor, and Jenna reported seeing fleeting shadows gliding along the walls. Each friend experienced moments of disorientation, losing track of time and direction, as if the building itself were reshaping to keep them inside. Nightfall intensified the haunting. Mara was convinced she saw figures in the broken windows outside, silhouettes of people standing still, staring at them. Alex attempted to reassure the group, but even he could not ignore the strange luminescence that sometimes glowed from within the walls. Simon, documenting everything with his camera, captured a faint reflection of a woman in a long dress moving across the hallway behind them, though no one was physically present. Panic began to set in as the resort seemed to react to their presence, doors slamming shut, windows rattling, and shadows stretching unnaturally across charred floors. By the fourth day, the friends' sense of reality had fractured. Time no longer seemed linear, minutes stretched into hours, and night appeared to persist indefinitely in certain areas of the resort. They began to hear their own names whispered softly, yet carried by voices not their own. The ballroom, once a grand hall of celebration, now appeared as a warped, nightmarish version of itself. Ceilings stretched unnaturally, chandeliers twisted into grotesque shapes, and the walls seemed to pulse, as if breathing. Figures glided effortlessly across the floor, faceless or with indistinct features, moving in ways that defied physics. Each friend's fear deepened, yet curiosity kept them moving forward, drawn by some unseen force. On the fifth night, the resort's influence became undeniable. Shadows became sentient, pressing against them, following, observing, sometimes mimicking movements in grotesque ways. The friends' reflections in broken mirrors twisted into horrifying parodies of themselves. screaming silently, or gesturing them toward certain areas. Alex, desperate to maintain rationality, attempted to map their movements and mark exits, but paths twisted and corridors looped back upon themselves. Even the staircases seemed to shift subtly, directing them to rooms they had not entered before. The whispers intensified, recounting intimate fears and memories with unnerving accuracy, eroding the friends' sense of identity. By the sixth night, Mara, Alex, Simon, and Jenna were completely unstable. Time and space were no longer consistent. Every room seemed simultaneously empty and full, familiar and alien. Shadows merged with smoke and ash, forming grotesque, humanoid shapes that glided silently across charred floors. The whispers became voices, omnipresent and commanding, pressing against the minds of the friends and eroding the last remnants of self-control. Even their cameras and recording devices began to malfunction, capturing only static, faint echoes, and fleeting glimpses of figures that vanished upon closer inspection. Attempts to leave were futile. Every hallway led back to the ballroom, or basement. Every exit appeared blocked or distorted. The friends' perceptions of each other blurred. They sometimes saw duplicates, reflections, or entirely new versions of themselves, all moving independently. Shadows and whispers worked in tandem to disorient and terrify, creating a constant sense of helplessness. Sleep brought only vivid nightmares, merging with reality, where fire, smoke, and faceless figures chased them endlessly through the resort's warped corridors. Years later, hikers and thrill-seekers report hearing piano music and whispers in the mountain, faint flickering lights in the windows of the abandoned resort, and glimpses of figures moving inside. Alex, Mara, Simon, and Jenna were never seen again. Local legends warn that the resort is sentient, feeding on fear and curiosity, reshaping reality to trap those who venture too close. The building remains patient and eternal, its charred walls and warped corridors waiting for the next group of explorers, the whispers calling their names on summer nights. Even today, the resort exudes a palpable sense of dread. Broken windows, twisted staircases, and the faint glow of spectral figures serve as a reminder of the dangers of curiosity and the power of a malevolent environment. The friends' presence lingers in the shadows, merged with the resort itself. A cautionary tale of how a summer vacation, intended for adventure, can become an eternal nightmare. Let's move to our 12th story. It started as a casual plan for a summer road trip for a group of 5 friends: Ethan, Lily, Max, Ava, and Connor, who decided to explore the rural countryside, chasing the thrill of abandoned places and local legends. Their destination was a small village, known for its forgotten asylum on the outskirts of town. A place long since shuttered due to reports of mistreatment, strange deaths, and unexplained disappearances. Locals spoke of eerie lights at night, whispers along the perimeter, and the sensation of being watched, yet the group, hungry for adventure, dismissed these stories as tales meant to scare children. They were determined to document everything, hoping to capture something extraordinary for their social media and personal thrill-seeking. The journey to the asylum was uneventful at first. The countryside was calm, dotted with wildflowers, ancient trees, and overgrown fields. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, the abandoned building came into view, tall, imposing, with shattered windows and ivy crawling up its crumbling walls. The air around it was still, carrying a faint metallic scent, as if the building itself exhaled the residue of decades of despair. Ethan, the most adventurous of the group, pushed forward, while Lily, more cautious, hesitated, feeling an inexplicable chill that seemed to crawl under her skin. Max, Ava, and Connor attempted to calm her nerves, joking about haunted summer vibes, but the atmosphere was undeniably oppressive. Entering the asylum, the friends were greeted by darkness and decay. Rusted beds, broken furniture, and peeling paint filled the hallways. Faint graffiti covered the walls, layered with years of neglect, yet it almost seemed intentional, as if left to communicate a warning. The first night, they explored the ground floors, documenting rooms and corridors, but subtle oddities began to appear. Shadows moved independently, corners of their vision filled with figures that vanished when looked at directly. and a faint whispering seemed to drift from room to room. Max tried to rationalize the experience as imagination, but even he felt a creeping sense of being observed. By the second day, the asylum's presence intensified. Doors slammed on their own, and cold drafts moved through the hallways despite boarded-up windows. Ava swore she saw figures at the ends of corridors, always just out of reach, vanishing whenever anyone approached. Connor found scratches on the walls forming patterns that were not there before, almost like a warning. Ethan pushed them to explore the upper floors, the reputed epicenter of paranormal activity, where patients had once been confined. The friends felt drawn forward as if compelled by an unseen force, their fear tempered by curiosity and the thrill of discovery. At night, the building seemed alive. The walls pulsed with faint vibrations, whispers forming words, and shadows sliding across ceilings and floors. Lily awoke to the sensation of being watched, seeing pale, faceless figures standing silently at the foot of her sleeping bag. Max and Connor reported similar experiences. Reflections in broken mirrors, showing distorted faces. Footsteps echoing without origin, and faint cries of unknown origin. Even Ethan, obsessed with capturing footage, felt the oppressive weight of the asylum pressing against his mind, challenging his rationality. By the third night, their sense of reality fractured. Time and space seemed distorted, hallways twisting and looping back upon themselves. The friends would take a single step, only to find themselves back at the same room or corridor they had entered minutes before. The whispers grew louder, reciting personal fears and secrets with chilling accuracy. Shadows coalesced into humanoid forms, faceless but distinctly human in proportion and movement, gliding silently across floors and ceilings. Each friend began to experience hallucinations blending with reality, screams echoing through empty halls, doors opening to impossible rooms, and figures merging with fog and darkness. Attempts to escape became futile. Every exit seemed blocked. Hallways twisted unpredictably, and corridors stretched into impossible lengths. The asylum's malevolent presence dominated all perception, manipulating fear, exhaustion, and curiosity to trap the friends. Ethan, driven by both terror and compulsion, wandered alone at times, drawn toward the old patient wings where whispers promised answers. Lily, Max, Ava, and Connor attempted to stay together, but even in close proximity, the building warped their perception, making them question who was real and what was an apparition. By the fourth night, the asylum had absorbed their sense of identity. Whispers filled their minds incessantly, recounting fears, regrets, and memories with unnerving detail. Shadows pressed in from all sides, sometimes mimicking their movements, other times moving independently. The friends' reflections in broken windows and mirrors twisted into grotesque versions of themselves, often screaming silently or gesturing them toward forbidden areas. Even their cameras and recording devices began malfunctioning, capturing only static, faint flashes, and fleeting glimpses of figures that vanished upon scrutiny. By the fifth night, the building's influence reached its peak. Every attempt at rational thought failed. Every escape route looped back into the asylum. The shadows merged with the fog, dust, and darkness, forming semi-humanoid entities that moved with intent and awareness. The friends' perception of themselves and each other blurred. Duplicates and distorted versions of themselves appeared. In reflections, sometimes interacting with the environment in ways they could not. Fear became all-consuming, eroding willpower, and curiosity became a trap, drawing them inexorably deeper into the building's sentient core. On the sixth night, Ethan, Lily, Max, Ava, and Connor were fully entrapped. Time had no meaning. Minutes stretched into hours, hours into days. The asylum itself seemed to breathe, pulsing with malevolent energy. Whispers no longer carried words, but emotions: fear, despair, helplessness pressing into the minds of the friends like waves of icy water. The building reshaped itself constantly, folding corridors, staircases, and rooms to prevent escape. Shadows glided effortlessly across walls and floors, sometimes merging with fog or with one another to form larger, grotesque forms. The friends' consciousnesses began to fracture, merging with the malevolent entity inhabiting the asylum. Years later, Locals report faint lights inside the abandoned building, whispers carried by the wind, and figures glimpsed behind broken windows. The friends were never seen again. The asylum remains patient and eternal, feeding on fear and curiosity, reshaping reality to trap the unwary. Ethan, Lily, Max, Ava, and Connor are absorbed into the building, their identities fragmented and merged with the malevolent presence. The whispers continue, calling the names of the curious, luring them into the halls of the forgotten asylum. Even today, on foggy summer nights, the asylum seems alive. Shadows glide silently across charred floors, corridors twist impossibly, and whispers beckon those who approach. The building is patient, eternal, and hungry, feeding on the fears of anyone drawn too close. The friend's presence lingers, intertwined, with the asylum itself a chilling testament to how a summer adventure can become an eternal nightmare.